everyone, Ben Taylor here and welcome to today's tutorial. So I haven't been around for a while, I haven't made a tutorial for around about a week now, so I'm sorry if I've missed you guys, but today everything is back to normal. So we're going to have a couple of videos which will be coming out on this channel every single week. So today's video is all for beginners and people which don't have much experience in the world of Photoshop. The reason I've made today's tutorial is because I was thinking the other day back to when I first started working for a website. And my job was to take photos and bulk edit them on Photoshop. Now, I had no previous experience how to do this. The company took me on with no experience and they let me run riot, which, you know, thanks, because I'm here now doing what I love doing. But I had to go home every single night and learn different techniques. And I do that by watching videos on YouTube and learning from professionals like you're probably doing now and other videos you watch. So I watched these videos and I used to notice how bloody hard it was to do some of the techniques that the pros were showing you how to do. And I'd always be thinking, you know, there's got to be an easy way of doing this. It can't be this difficult, surely. So it became a passion of mine to learn how to do different techniques on Photoshop and do it the easy way. Because I knew that there had to be easy ways of doing these things. So I know that Photoshop can be daunting, okay? And I know that when you first start out, it can be really frustrating and probably a little bit overwhelming because you've got all these different things which are thrown in front of you that you can learn. But, you know, where do you start? And it's really difficult because, you know, Photoshop can be a steep learning curve if you don't know how to learn it correctly. So today's tutorial is aimed at you beginners because I'm going to show you how that you're going to be able to take photos from your camera or photos off your computer and you're going to be able to edit them inside Photoshop and make them look amazing. And not just that, you're going to be able to do this easily and quickly. So I can hear the skepticism from you already because you're probably thinking, how is that possible, Ben? Because I've watched all these tutorials and, you know, it seemed really hard to me. Well, that's why I'm here now, because I'm going to show you how to do this easily. But before I jump into today's tutorial and I show you how to do this, there's one little thing which is worth discussing with you. Because if you're here now watching this because you enjoy photography, Lightroom and Photoshop, then it may be in your interest to click subscribe on our channel and then watch all our videos which we release each week for free, because we actually release 2 videos each week which you can enjoy, and all you have to do is click subscribe and then click the notification bell and then you'll get notified every single time that these get uploaded. That's just something for you to think about while you're watching today's tutorial. Okay, so without further ado, I'm really excited about showing you how to do this because I know that when you've finished this video, you're going to be like, okay, this is so easy now, I want to be creative myself and I want to start making these changes to my photos. So without further ado, let's jump into today's tutorial and get started. Okay, so we want to start with the very obvious, and the very obvious is you want to make sure that you've got Photoshop open. I know it seems silly, but you know, make sure you've got Photoshop open. And then you can see in front of you now this image. This is the image that we're going to be using for today's tutorial. The great news is you can use this image because I've put a link in the description area of this tutorial on YouTube for you to download. Now, if you're not sure where that is, where you come and clicked onto this video, below it will be a description area. If you just click the down arrow, you'll see some writing in there and then you'll see a link. Click that link and you'll be able to download this image and then drag it into Photoshop. So this image now in front of us, it's a beautiful image, okay? It's a lovely landscape image, but the important thing to remember that these techniques which you're going to be learning in today's tutorial don't just apply to landscape pictures, you can use them with portraits and all other different kinds of images as well. Okay, so you should have this image open now on your Photoshop and you should be ready to go. The very first thing I'm going to start by doing, and this is always the case, is I'm going to make sure that I'm not working on my background layer. So I'm going to duplicate the layer so we can work on a layer above the background. Now there's many reasons why you shouldn't work on the background layer. We're not going to get into all of them now because that can be for another tutorial. but it's just important for you to know, don't work on the background layer. So we're going to make a duplicate layer, and how we do that is we press Ctrl J on our keyboard. This is the shortcut to make a duplicate layer. You'll now see that the layer has popped up above the background layer there. So now we've got this duplicate layer of the background, we can start doing some work to this picture and making the changes so that we can get amazing edits. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a tool, and this is the tool that I'm going to show you to use in Photoshop, which you're going to be able to use every single time you edit a picture. This should be one of the first places that you start. So the tool can be found up here on Filter. So hit Filter and then come down to Camera Raw Filter and just click there. Now this is going to open up this Camera Raw Filter in front of you. And you can see the picture in the middle, and then on the right hand side here you can see some options. So at the moment the options we have in front of us are temperature, tint, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, vibrance and saturation. Let's go through each one of these and then show you the changes that you can make with these to your image. So the great thing about these is they are sliders. So with a slider you can push it up or down and it's going to make a change to the image. So watch, if I just push this up, you can see there's yellow here and there's blue here. If I push it up, watch, it's going to start adding more yellow into the image. So how simple is that? I'm just going to bring it down to 0 again, and then you can do the same with a tint. You can add more of this colour in here or more of the green in here. So I'm just going to push this up and choose this magenta and start dragging this into the image, and now you can see that this is reflected in the image. You can see that either way I push it, it's going to push that colour into the image. So these two here you can change the colour of the image with. Temperature, usually with this slider, if I look at the image and I think, okay, it looks a bit cold, and generally in a cold image you'll have blue or cyan colours, then you can push up the yellow here to increase the yellow, and yellow usually means more warmth in an image, which gives you that feeling of a nice sunny day. Now if it was too warm, then I could push it down like this, and then you get a colder feel because you're adding that blue or a cyan into the image. So let's just push that back up there. The same with tint. You can push up the purple or the magenta or push down the green to add that into your image. So at the moment I'm not going to change the colours at all because I actually quite like the look of the colour. But my first viewpoint when I look at this image is I'm thinking that it's a bit dark. So how can we change the darkness? Exposure is the next one on our list of options here. Now exposure means basically you can push more light or you can introduce more dark into the image. So if I push up, you can see I'm now introducing more light into the image, and you can see that that's already looking a lot better. Let's just bring it back down to where it was. You can now see how dark the image originally is. So I'm going to push it up and I'm going to introduce some exposure or some light into the image, and that looks a lot better around about there. Now contrast is the contrast between the colours, okay? So this is the next slider on the list. So let me show you what contrast does. If I bring the contrast down, you can see I'm reducing the contrast between the colours, and it flattens the image so it doesn't look as punchy. So if I grab the contrast slider now and then I push it up, you can see that I'm increasing the punchiness in the image, and I quite like a bit of contrast introduced to this image to make the colours stand out from each other. The third slider is highlights. Now highlights really quite self-explanatory. It's going to be the highlights in the image, so the lighter areas. So if I push the highlights up, I'm going to increase them. So let's just see what this does. So I'm pushing up the highlights now, and you can see it's making the lighter areas in the image brighter. So I actually think we can introduce a few highlights into the image and make it look lighter like that. Now with the shadows, this slider, you can make the shadows darker or you can make them lighter. So if I bring the shadows down, watch what happens. I'm giving more darkness to the shadows. Now I don't want to do that because it's going to make the image more oppressive. So I want to make sure that the shadows are up at around about 0 while they started. Now whites, obviously, if you're pushing the whites up, then you're going to be adding more brightness into the whites. If you're pulling the whites down, you're going to be adding more darkness into the whites. Now it's worth knowing that if you're doing this on a portrait image where you've got a subject in the image, you want to make sure that you're not messing around with the whites too much. And this is because when you mess around with the whites on the subject, it can really have implications with the way the skin ends up looking. So it's worth keeping any changes on your whites when you're doing portrait editing down to a minimum. This is probably a good time for me to let you know that I've actually done a portrait tutorial which is all about outdoor portrait editing, and what you can do is you can click on the link just above here and you can go straight across to that. And the brilliant thing about this tutorial is it uses the exactly same tool as the one that we're doing now, and that's the camera raw filter. So if you're more interested in learning about outdoor portrait editing, then click along, go along to there, and the things that you can learn from this tutorial you'll be able to apply to that tutorial and learn all about portrait editing. Okay, back to this tutorial. The next thing is blacks. So with blacks it's the same again. You can push it down and increase darkness into your blacks, or you can push it up and increase brightness into your blacks. Now I think the blacks could do with a slight bit of lightness into them, so I'm just going to push it up to around about 4 or 5. Now clarity is an interesting one. If you've never come across clarity before, watch what happens. I'm going to grab clarity and push it up, and watch. Clarity is very similar to sharpening. If you have a look now at the image, you can see that the clarity has added more detail between the colours. So if you weren't able to see that before, watch, I'm going to drag it down now and look what happens. If I drag the clarity down, the image suddenly becomes a lot smoother. Drag it up again, and it's going to add more detail between the colours. So if we just zoom out here, what I'm going to do with the clarity is I'm going to make sure it's a little bit higher than where it was to start with, because I actually like adding a bit of detail into this image. It's going to make the trees separate more, which is going to bring that part of the image alive, and it's also going to add more of a grainy effect to the wood in this cabin here, which is on the water. So it's going to make it look more realistic. Okay, so we've pushed the clarity up, which adds detail into the image. Now vibrance and saturation. If you're not familiar with these are two things that you really need to get familiar with. So let's have a look first at saturation. Saturation is going to add more of the colour. So let me show you what I mean. If I push the saturation up, watch what happens to the image. You can see it increases the saturation of the colours. Now in some images this works like a dream, but in this image you can see by pushing it up too much it's actually made it look a bit unrealistic. So it doesn't look like it's come out of the camera now. It looks like it's, you know, blatantly being photoshopped, and we don't want that. So most times what I do is I actually leave the saturation where it is, and I use the vibrancy slider to push more vibrancy into the colours. So watch how much more natural it looks when I use the vibrancy slider. You can now see that I've added more vibrancy into the colours in the image here. I haven't used the saturation slider because that may look unrealistic, and by using just the vibrancy slider on its own, it's increased the colour but it's kept it looking natural. So, you know, people aren't going to go onto this image and go, hey there mate, this is definitely photoshopped. They're going to look at this and think, wow, this is just an awesome picture you've created here, and well done. Right, okay, so we've gone through the sliders here on the right hand side, okay? We've showed you how to do the light, we showed you how to change the shadows, the highlights, the blacks and the whites in the image. And just by making these few changes, we've really changed the way this image looks, and we've made it look better. So you might be looking at it thinking, well, I can't really see many changes that have occurred here, Ben. Well, watch what happens when I press the P key on the keyboard. This is going to show you the before we made any changes at all. Watch this. This is the before. Look how flat, dark, and just completely unimpressive this image looks. Let's press the P key again. Look at the difference. So all we've done is we've gone onto Camera Raw filter, we've gone onto the right hand side, and we've made a few changes. We've changed the light and the darks, the contrast, the shadows, highlights, and the colour. And just by changing these few things, which is super easy, we've made this much difference. So I think this image is starting to look amazing. Now we can take this a step further, okay? I don't want to kind of overwhelm you because maybe this is quite a lot of information that you've took in here, okay? But I'm going to show you one other thing that you can do with this tool that you can take away today, you can add to your own photo editing, and you can really get some amazing results. So the next thing I'm going to show you is something called the adjustment brush, which can be found up here. I'm going to click on that. Now we've made adjustments to the image, okay? So we've changed the lights and the darks and the exposure, and also we've changed the colours. Now the great thing about this adjustment brush is we can change certain parts of the image. Before we've been doing general changes to the whole image, but sometimes you don't want to change the whole image, you actually want to just change certain areas. So how we go about doing that is with the adjustment brush. So all you have to do with the adjustment brush simply is you can paint over areas of the image that you want to change, and then you can make the changes by moving the sliders around. Okay, so let's look at some areas of this image that we want to change. So this part of the cabin here, it's not very saturated and the colour's not coming through very much. I think if we were to paint over this area and then really increase the temperature and the vibrancy, it would make this part of the cabin stand out more, and it could really add some more depth to the image. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to change the size of my brush, because at the moment you can see I'm not going to just be painting on this part here, I'm also going to be going over this for the roof here and then also down here, which I don't want to do. So to change the size of the brush, it's easy. The left and right bracket key on your keyboard are the ways to change the brush size. So if I use the left bracket key, I can make it smaller. If I use the right bracket key, I can make it bigger. So I'm going to decrease the size of the brush, use the left bracket key, and then I just want to cover this area here on the cabin. So I'm simply just going to paint over this, like this here. Now you can already see that I've got some settings here applied, okay? Now if you wanted to, you could clear these settings and just press that down here. But actually the settings that are already on here, I've made a really nice change to the side of the cabin. It's the one that I wanted. Now I need to reflect this change in the water because you can see the reflection of the cabin here. So all I'm going to do is just paint over that as well. And I'm just going to bring the colour through there. Now when you paint over the area, all you have to do is you have to move these sliders around to make the changes. So because that was already in place, I'm going to show you how to do that. We've painted over the area, and now I'm simply going to move the sliders around here to make some changes. So if I wanted to make it look colder, I'd simply just grab my temperature and bring it down. Now as you can see, that looks horrible. So we're not going to do that. But what it has done is it's highlighted that I haven't covered the whole area. So if I just cover this bit as well, and just that bit down there, okay? I've actually covered a little bit around here as well, which I'm not too bothered about because it's by the front of the cabin, which is almost joined to the side. So all I need to do now is, remember I wanted to add more of a warm colour and more colour into the side, so I'm just going to grab my temperature and then push it up to add more warmth into the side of the cabin there. Now I could make a few more changes. I could change the exposure to make it lighter, but I don't think that looks realistic, so I'm going to drag that down. I'm going to push the contrast up just a little bit, so that just makes the colours a bit more contrasty. I'm not going to affect the highlights or the shadows, or the whites or the blacks. Now I could change the clarity if I wanted to, but I don't, because I think that there's enough detail in there showing the kind of wood grain. Now the saturation's quite high, and I actually think that it looks a bit oversaturated. So remember, you can just grab the slider here, which I'm going to do, and I'm just going to drag my saturation down like that. And that now to me looks a lot more realistic. So you can use this adjustment brush to paint over certain parts of the image and increase or decrease certain changes. So you can do this anywhere, and this is the power of the adjustment brush in the camera raw filter. Okay, so we've made these changes with the adjustment brush, and we've also made overall changes to the whole image. Now I think we've really transformed this image and made it look amazing. But just so you can see it with your own eyes, let's have a look at the before and then the after. So if you remember, to preview the before, all you have to do is go to the P button on your keyboard. So I'm going to press P. This is the before image, which is completely washed out. It's dark and it's flat and it has very little colour. And then let's press P again. And this is the after image. We've really transformed this image in Photoshop. So when you've finished, you just go ahead now and click OK. And this will make the changes to your image inside Photoshop. So that's it guys, we've took an image in Photoshop and made it look amazing, really transformed it, and we made it easy. So what I really hope you can take away from today's tutorial is that when you next go to edit one of your photos out of a camera or say off your hard drive, you're going to feel more comfortable because you're going to know that you can go to this tool in Photoshop, which is Camera Raw Filter, and you can make most of the global changes so easily to the image, and you haven't got to like stress or feel overwhelmed because it's going to be difficult anymore. So I really hope that you found today's tutorial helpful, and if you enjoyed it, then I'd really appreciate if you just hit the like button on YouTube to let me know that I've done a good job and also that you enjoyed it. And even more importantly, why not leave me a comment, because I'd love to see how you've actually got on. Even some of your pictures that you're actually editing, that would be really cool. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel because we make these videos for people like yourself to enjoy, and I'd really be kind of thankful and appreciative if you could do that. Now, whatever you do today, guys, I hope you have the best day, and I hope to see you all again really, really soon. I really wanted to do this.